Mr. Fennelly is a second. Roll call?
Well,
Do you accept?
I think,
Sorry,
no, I think protocol dictates whether he'll accept the nomination.
we just didn't do that part last time.
Yeah.
Do you accept the nomination?
I'll accept.
Okay. Roll call. Yes.
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 Yes. Yes?
Yes.
Abstain.
Mhm. Very good.
Okay.
And then final
Founding
secretary.
secretary. Do we have a nomination for secretary?
I nominate MJ if you're interested.
Sure, I'd be happy to continue.
I'll
Second.
Second. Mrs. Newhouse, second. You accept?
Sure.
You've done this a lot. I feel like, Mrs. Burns, will you do it?
Perfect.
Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Are we good?
Okay.
Okay.
You can slide over.
Really, do you really do this? You shift? Shift.
Head up there.
Would one of you like to join me on this side of the country?
What is this?
Get some real estate?
Chairs.
Steve, take your name and go home.
Here, let me take this. All right.
Oh, I have it in the pocketbook too.
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to my new space. All right, so we will move on with the approval of items by consensus. This is good, actually. This is good. First, we'll start with the approval of minutes, April 24th, 2019. Mrs. Burns, do I have a second? Mrs. Newhouse, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Would we
Abstain?
Or, yeah.
Abstain. So that is,
We need a quorum, right? So even though I wasn't here, it's legal for me to vote.
you can vote.
Yes.
And I
They
read them,
shouldn't
so.
vote, they should abstain, yeah.
Actually, just have one comment on
Sure.
on the minutes, that on the first page, under the very first item for approval, which was approval of the minutes at the last meeting, it doesn't mention who the abstention is, which is typical, and is in all the others. I think that it was Mrs. Burns, because I think that she had been absent the previous meeting.
Okay.
So
I concur, I believe it was me who abstained.
So I think we should amend the minutes to reflect that and then approve. So I would move to amend the minutes by putting Ms. Burns in parentheses
Okay,
and then approve the minutes without amendment.
okay. So.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. So Mr. Bjork seconds, and then is everyone in favor of amending the minutes with that, of accepting the minutes with that amendment? All in favor? So that's everybody, and 2 abstentions? Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Fennelly and Mr. Samaha. Abstention. Oh, this is very confusing tonight. All right, we have some, I know, some warrants. G 430, 431, 432, 433, R 239, R 240, R 241, L 80, L 81, L 82, L 83, and FS 33. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Newhouse, seconded by Mrs. Burns. All in favor? That's unanimous. Payroll ending 5/8/19. Do I have a motion to accept that? Mrs. Burns, seconded by Mr. Ragsdale. All in favor? That's unanimous. We have CB 23. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Newhouse, do I have a second? Mr. Ragsdale, all in favor? That's everybody but 2 abstentions, Mr. Bjork and Mrs. Burns. And warrants, SPED 44, SPED 45, and SPED 46. Do I have a motion? Mr. Ragsdale, seconded by Mr. Samaha. All in favor? And that is 3 abstentions, Mrs. Newhouse, Mr. Bjork, and Mrs. Burns. Thank you. All right. Oh, moving right along, Allison Jordan, our student representative. Thanks for being here.
Last Wednesday, we had the 3rd annual Special Olympics. It was a really fun and successful day, and the rain held out for pretty long. I think it only rained for like a few minutes. April 27th to May 1st, students went to DECA ICDC in Orlando, where 5 students competed and 13 attended leadership academies. These academies help them bring back to DECA what they learned from other students all across the country and in Canada. They also had the opportunities to meet new people and see old friends again from past DECA events. They got to spend time at Disneyland as well as the Universal Parks. AP exams began on Monday and are continuing through next week. Senior prom was last Friday, which I heard was a lot of fun. And today we had a speaker come from NBC to talk about reporting on like sports, the Red Sox and others. So
Excellent. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Any comments or questions from the board?
I just think you might want to learn the other Boston sports teams.
Well, I didn't get the chance to go to the.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
It sounded like that she only reported on the Red Sox, but I unfortunately didn't get to attend. I know the other team.
Thank you very
Oh,
much,
they're
Allison.
playing tonight, actually.
Tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much. And now it is the superintendent's report, so I'll pass it over to you, Dr. Brand.
Thank you again, and good evening. 2 items to note, but if I may, just to start with mention of the Special Olympics. It's one of those events, as many, that I've heard about over my time here in Wilmington, but truly, I have to say, it was by far it surpassed so much of the vision that people had painted in terms of not just the students and their peers on the field, but more specifically the community support that was ever so present. It was truly an incredible event. For those of you that have been here and have been a part of this or have seen it, you know well what I'm talking about. But kudos to the Wilmington community for supporting this in the way that they do, and the entire community. So there are 2 items under the report this evening in the packet that I'll just briefly speak to, if I may. The first is the strategic plan update. We concluded in this room earlier this week the formal work that set the foundation for the strategic plan that included, as you know, almost 60 stakeholders throughout the district. It's been such a pleasure to work with this group of community members, of staff, of students, school committee, the list goes on, and with our consultant that, again, thank you to the school committee for your approval earlier this year to pursue. From all accounts and the feedback, it really was a terrific experience that I'm excited to be able to share more with the community about very quickly. In the packet, there's a brief outline around sort of where we're going with this work, what you can expect to see if all goes as planned at the next school committee meeting as a draft, if you will, of the plan will start to emerge. And it'll be the opportunity for not just this governing body, but also the community to start to get a sense of what have emerged as priorities for the district. In the packet, you'll note a couple of documents. First, a memo that provides a little bit of an overview of some of the key components that you will soon see as part of the strategic plan, just to name a couple. A refreshed mission, vision, and core values, an important cornerstone for, I think, any strategic plan within a school district. Objectives, initiatives, and outcomes, just to name a few. One of the things that I think is really great to know is certainly strategic plans can take a lot of different shapes and forms, and there's not necessarily one right or wrong way to do that work. But we've followed very closely the recommended path, if you will, that the Department of Education is advocating for. And is hoping that school districts around the Commonwealth will consider. And so in the packet, I included an overview from the Department of Education that really hits upon the framework, if you will, that we followed. And I think it, by all accounts, seemed to have been well received by those who are involved. So much more to come on this, not just at one next meeting, but many, many after. But certainly stay tuned for more as this plan really comes to fruition and takes shape. I'm happy to take any comments or questions that folks may have about the strategic plan before I move on. it's my hope at the next meeting to have members of the committee who are involved in this work also talk to their experiences and start to present and roll out the plan. The elementary curriculum implementation plan update is item 6B. There's a memo in your packet that Dr. Regan put together. And it provides an overview. This is meant to be informational, not intended to be a broad-scale, if you will, presentation this evening. But we've spoken recently at this table about the body of work that both Dr. Regan and I came to quickly realize we inherited, if you will, from some of the decisions and some of the direction that has been adopted by the district prior to our arrival. It's the bulk of this work, as outlined in this memo here, certainly speaks to the elementary level, and that's not to say that there's not work around curriculum and teaching and learning and such at the high school and middle school and high school that's not unfolding. Certainly that's not the case, but there is an abundance of work at the elementary level, specifically across our elementary schools, that is in motion, and also that needs to that we need to pursue. So this is intended, again, just to be informational. Provides a quick broad brush overview of some of the work, and specifically as it relates to the different curricular areas. I'll let Dr. Regan speak a little bit more to it perhaps, and again, if you have some questions here, but this can be certainly a source of further discussion and conversation in the future. But this was shared with our staff. I thought Dr. Regan did a nice job of providing an overview, and if not for informational purposes, otherwise for the committee. So, Dr. Regan?
Just the letter that, if it's not obvious, that's what was sent to elementary teachers. And then on the chart, it does indicate that it's subject to change. I know that there is understandable concern around the social studies piece, since there are new frameworks, and it seems like that's far out. But you can see in 2020-21, we do have some flexibility that we could actually start to consider doing some piloting there. My biggest concern rushing into that is that the vendors are, they're catching up with Massachusetts standards, so like they'll come to you and say that we have a product and it's completely aligned, and then as you look more deeply you realize it's not quite there yet. But just today I received information through Dr. Brand about Primary Source, which is another organization that's trying to get into this game, and they're actually very credible, and so that's something we could consider for elementary too. So that's very much a moving target that I'm hoping we see moving to the left of the chart, if you're looking at the chart, to get there earlier. But I just wanted to give us breathing room in case we couldn't identify a program early enough.
Could I just get some clarification, Dr. Regan, on, I know in the past what I've been used to, and it's been quite a while since it's been done, is we talked about the curriculum renewal schedules. And this may be a little premature at this juncture, because I know you're still acclimating, we've got priorities we need to target. At some point, will the board be presented a curriculum renewal schedule with regards to each level, school level, just so that we can kind of see it as a whole, to see what kind of work the CTLs and, under your direction, will be focusing over a 4 or 5 year plan. I think it would be easier as opposed, in some aspects, and I appreciate this very much.
Sure.
Because the other aspect, I know math seems to be, solid, but I wasn't sure what your thoughts were with regards to reviewing our math curriculum, and because I would surmise that, as has been done, that I'm at a loss for the word, the standards may change or be enhanced, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I just kind of like to get your preliminary thoughts as to what maybe the board could expect in the future.
So that is something that has come up in several conversations that I've had during the year with a variety of people, teachers and curriculum leaders and principals, reminding me or letting me know that the district, like many districts, used to have a more formal curriculum review or renewal process where you had a very clear-cut schedule, and you knew when English was up and when social studies was up, and everybody had that cycle going. So there's a desire to get that back into place. I think the hesitation that I'm sensing from folks as they're discussing it with me is how much heavy lifting we have going on K-5 right now, and whether or not we can we effectively layer that on top? I think we can. I just don't know exactly what that timeline will be yet, but what I think I can promise the community is I could bring something back to you perhaps in the fall of next year that sort of at least lays out a rough draft of how we might, kind of dip our toe in the water. Math is a good example, where that's been in place now for, 3 years or so. I could be wrong on that, could be 4. But it's time to look at that and make sure that it continues to be effective. So
I found.
it's on the radar. Yeah.
Thank you, because I found it helpful, especially in the areas where students, where kids are transitioning from the middle school, and how that might kind of jigsaw in with the high school, and seeing how that, those different aspects, seeing how certain curriculum lines up.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question my focus has been heavily on elementary this year because there's such significant movement happening there. But I've had many conversations with the high school CTLs. Math is a great example where, they're using a variety of different materials and texts. They don't have a core program, a box program as you might expect, you see at the elementary and middle school, and whether or not we want to consider that or not. And so that those conversations have happened. It's just that we have to, like you said, I think we need to firm them up a bit and put them more in the, make them look more like a long-range plan than just sort of a bunch of conversations.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Mr.
I
Smaha?
did, yeah. I'm looking at next year on the last page, and I'm seeing, so third grade, for example, during next year, it says implement new science program, implement writers workshop, and the word study pilot by 4 teachers. I guess my question is, does that seem doable of 3 new programs? So there might be 4 teachers that are doing 3 new things. Is that
Yeah,
a reasonable
there's a
thing
couple
to
of things
ask?
that aren't captured in this flow chart. One is the science program, for example. Our intention next year is to implement the program. We're going to implement it with fidelity, but we're not going to be saying, all right, there's 4 units in grade 1, you've got to get through all 4 of these units. We're fully expecting to have teachers need to take some time to become comfortable with the program, and we want to approach it with support, and let's figure out the kinks sort of that year. So it'll be I hate to use the word a soft rollout because everyone's going to be using it, and we're going to, this summer, be very planful about which units are absolute musts so that we have some consistency. We don't want to just say, here's the program, do what you can. We'd rather say to first grade, here's the program, these are the 2 absolute must-do units. This is the next one, and then if this 4th one can happen, that's great, but let's try, let's make sure we at least get through there. So that's going to be a little bit of a lighter lift than it might look like. And then the other piece is around the word study pilot, because I think, you do raise a good point. For those 3 grades, there will be 3 things happening. But my hope is that Holly Benishevitz, myself, and the elementary principals that are in those 4 schools will be able to select teachers that we believe are in a good place to do that. Many of the teachers in those grades have done sort of a word, not a word study pilot, a writer's workshop pilot, if you will, with some coaching this year. So they've already got sort of a leg up on that next year. So ideally, we'd find teachers that are sort of in that position where they're very comfortable with the workshop model, and we think that they can add the word study, which, quite frankly, the word study is it's a smaller component. It's a piece of their literacy block. I mean, it is a new program that they will be trying out, but even with the pilot, that's going to be very flexible too. We want them to get a taste of it, get a sense of it. It's not going to be as demanding as you need to make sure you're getting through the program step by step.
Thank you.
So, yeah, James actually kind of touched on my point. I would just, the only thing I would add is that we've discussed pretty much all of these things. And we knew it was aggressive, but to see it all in this flow chart and in the text of your memo, it is aggressive. And we give the teachers a lot of credit for being able to get this done.
Yeah, that's why I tried to frame the tone of the email to sort of recognize the hard work that they have been doing and let them know I wish that we could let them off the hook on a lot of this, but in reality, we're sort of behind a little bit in some of these areas, and we really have to work together to push forward. But I'm trying to approach it with the help of our curriculum folks and the principals at the elementary level in a very supportive way, that if you're struggling with this, let us come in and provide you the support that you need. Let's have conversations about it. Let's work through this together, not sort of, here's the program, good luck. I think that's definitely not our approach. And, you know, we're hoping that that might help alleviate some of the anxiety that teachers would be logically feeling around a lot of this work.
Mr. Hexton?
I take your comment about the vendors not being quite up to speed with the new curriculum changes to heart, because I think that that's kind of the story of vendors and curriculum changes. That, I mean, even back when the Common Core was adopted by, more than 40 states, and so you have every incentive in the world to get high-quality aligned materials out there. They got them somewhat aligned fairly early, but they were terrible at the beginning. And just because something is aligned doesn't mean that it's actually good. And so actually making sure that we have not only aligned curriculum materials, but something that is an effective teaching tool is pretty important. One thing I want to ask about is that in the 21-22 year, there's now kind of an offset in the rollout of the social studies program, that K through 2 are piloting the assessment, but then there's nothing in grades 3 through 5, and that's offset by a year. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
So that could be one of these that falls under subject to change. The reason I did that was because at the moment when I created this, I wasn't sure what the cost of that would be. So I was trying to, create a master plan that might be more fiscally doable for us, rather than trying to purchase something that's gonna be K-5. We might be able to, and that may be something next year as we look more deeply into these programs. We realize, like Primary Source, for example, is much more affordable than buying a canned program through, say, Pearson or Houghton Mifflin. If we find that Primary Source is a viable product and we have teachers look at it and we think we want to explore that, then we might change that and just say, all right, we're gonna pilot everyone together because we've found an option that could potentially be feasible budget-wise. One of the things I tried to adjust in this budget cycle is that we had our other subscriptions were all coming due at the same time. So while it may be a little less advantageous of us to say buy a program for 1 year because it costs less, costs more money than a multi-year contract, I'm trying to set that up as we go forward so that we'll have no more than 2 or 3 once everything is rolled out that are expiring in any given year. So,
Stagger it a little bit, so.
yeah, so that was also a piece of this. It was just trying to sort of piece this together, so all of a sudden we don't have a $150,000 curriculum budget item that we have to approve. That's one item, as opposed to spreading it out across 3 areas. So I think I just keep coming back to those social studies columns could be shifted over, I think, once we get a little more knowledge under our belt next year in terms of what our options might be.
Sure, I mean, anything that plans out 5 years is always going to be a work in motion.
Right,
Because you can't,
right.
you don't count on year 4 being exactly what you anticipated when you planned it.
And we don't know where the work study pilot's gonna lead us. I mean, we could end up flat on that too. That may not be viable after we look at those 2 products, so we'll play that by ear.
Who do I ask? Do I ask you?
You
Yes.
can ask yourself.
Chair recognizes the chair.
What are, and Dr. Regan, what are the responses to the pilot now, the science pilot now? Do we have a sense as to how the teachers are feeling?
Yeah, we're in pretty good shape. We've met over the last 3 months. I think the group has met 4 times, both sides coming together. We've done a lot of sharing of sort of strengths and weaknesses. Our last meeting, I gave the members a rubric that we developed that they use to measure the strengths and weaknesses of the programs. I have a meeting tomorrow morning, I think. No, I'm sorry, it's a week from tomorrow. Maybe it's tomorrow. It's in my calendar. I just don't want, if they're watching at home, I don't want them to say, it is tomorrow, you better be there. It is in my calendar, with Lisa Murphy and Amy Asconi, who's our science lead. We're gonna take that time to look at all of the data that we got from the pilot teachers. And then we're gonna sort of synthesize it together and come up with a decision there. We have quotes from both companies. One is definitely more expensive than the other, but there are, like I said, there are pluses and minuses to to both. So without sort of tipping a hat, because we really haven't looked at the feedback that closely yet, I feel like we're in a good spot that Lisa, Amy, and I can, you know, by the end of this month, definitely. We won't have it for the next school committee meeting this month, but it, potentially it would be the meeting in June is our hope to come and present to you our recommended program for next year.
And the word study, what program are you looking into for the
So
pilot?
Pearson has created one called Words Their Way, which I think it already existed for them K2, but they've bumped it up into the upper elementaries. And the other doesn't really have a name, but it's developed by Fountas and Pinnell, so I don't know if they'll craft a name for it, but it's the Fountas and Pinnell program, which is also brand new. We don't even have really any materials to sort of even look at yet, but that they're saying that it'll be out maybe by June, but definitely by the summer, so those are the two. And those are, you know, Holly did some research, and those are really the two most viable, if not the only two that are really out there right now for the upper elementary grades. And this is something that the 3 through 5 teachers were asking for. I don't know how they'll feel once we get to an implementation stage, but it is something that they had discussed that they felt would be welcomed by them if we could find a program that was designed for them.
I just wonder if a company that is presenting a word study program can't come up with a title for it. That's concerning.
All other indicators of that Fountas and Pinnell are quite reputable, but yeah, I hear you.
And just one more question, then I will stop. The Words Their Way, or whatever program you decide to use, is it for all students, or is it gonna be meant for an intervention
That's
for
all
some students?
Yeah, it would be
But it will be differentiated, I'm guessing?
well, right now, K2, I mean, they do provide, they do use it for intervention purposes, but the core program would be available to all students and used as part of their literacy block. And then I would assume, like they do K2, that reading specialists, special ed teachers, classroom teachers as needed could use it also to provide additional supports for students that need it. But, you know, at the core of it, it will be used for everybody. That's the plan right now, anyway, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
If I just may, thank you. You know, I want to thank Dr. Regan again. He touched upon some of it, and as did some of your questions, that, you know, part of this effort is trying to be mindful of really three things as I think about these endeavors: time, money, and capacity. And when there's not a lot of either of those, or when there are limited or tensions on any of those, this is really an effort under Dr. Regan's leadership, as best as I think he can tell, we can tell. There perhaps wasn't a map quite like this in place, and I thank him for working with the principals and leaders to try and give life to this. It is daunting. It's overwhelming. I know it is. I'm not even as deeply involved as Dr. Regan is and the others, but I think it's important to note for the community that these are not initiatives. They're foundational in terms of the elementary program, and this is an effort to try and provide a meaningful roadmap to get to the point that is believed necessary. So balancing those three aspects. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to new business. I'll pass that over to you.
Sure, thank you. A couple of things to address tonight under item 8, new business. First off, in your packet is a memo regarding the last day of school. As I understand, this is a fairly customary practice here in the district to have the school committee take a vote to approve the last day of school. I'm pleased to be able to share with you that is Wednesday, June the 12th. We had one snow day, as you might recall, this year. And so as a result of that, we are ending a little bit earlier, indeed, in the month, as I know many districts will be. But Wednesday, June 12th, as the memo outlines, is officially now, barring any other issues that interfere with school, will be the last official day of school here in the Wilmington Public Schools. And with that, looking for a motion tonight for your approval of June 12th as the last day.
Mrs. Newhouse, second. Mr. Samaha? All in favor? June 12th? That's unanimous.
You know, everyone can plan their vacations.
As long as we don't have any flood days.
That's actually quite possible.
Don't say that.
If I might?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Item 8B, vaping committee presentation. So there are a number of guests that we have this evening who I'll first turn over to Ms. Murray.
I'm a student on the way back from a track meet, which
Okay.
is part of our presentation. We were wondering if we could go through the new business and be at the end of that section.
With your,
That's
I
fine.
don't know if you have to vote, but
okay.
No, that's fine.
we'd
We
appreciate
can take that out of
Okay.
order, so we'll go to 8C.
All right, so 8C. I just have to rearrange the presentation. That's okay. Thank you, sir. Nathan will help with that. All right, so we'll just, we'll move slightly out of order. We will return to item 8B. 8C is the student activities fees report. And I'll ask Tim to come forward to assist with this. To provide context of what this is and why it's here, you may recall that earlier this year, we had a discussion around the table here with the committee around, it really started with athletic fees. Actually bringing us back to the discussion around the swim team, if I remember correctly. And coming out of that discussion, as the committee, of course, did approve the districts moving forward with the swim team as a co-op program, emerged some interest in other fees related to either athletics and/or other activities throughout the district. And I think in part, as I remember, part of this was, our context here in Wilmington is, generally speaking, taking much pride in being a non-fee district for such things as athletics, busing, the kind of things that is not at all unusual to find user fees in other school districts in the Commonwealth. And so the request from the committee was to try and wrap our hands around what other additional costs might be rightly incurred by families, even though we don't have per se a user fee for athletics or others. But what's the actual monetary cost to families? And so this is really an effort to come back and report out to you. It's not looking for any action tonight. It really is just informational. But thanks to Tim, really this centers around athletics. At the end of the presentation, there's a couple of other areas that I'll just briefly highlight. But thank you to Tim. Working with his coaches over the course of the 3 seasons, there was a continual effort to try and gather information that pertained to finances that families might rightly be asked to contribute to, that were required to support their participation. So with that, I'll turn that over to Tim. Yes, and sorry, Nathan, could we get this monitor on?
Down here.
Down here. Thank you.
So, thank you, Dr. Brand. Working with the coaches, Dr. Brand asked that we target a few areas just to do our due diligence. So we wanted to know exactly, what costs there are to the student athlete to participate in a certain sport. Outside training camps, preseason camps, we asked the coaches if those were mandatory. Also, any team fundraising, if it was mandatory, and cost and fees required to participate. So in coming back, we outlined it based on each season. So the first slide up now is the fall. Under the second column, those are all the equipment costs that would be required. It ranges anywhere from $50 to $2,000. $50 more for a running-only sport, $2,000 to ice hockey, probably the most expensive sport. So it is a wide range based on style and preference that the students participate in. Mandatory training camps, nothing is required. MIAA, bless you, MIA rules prohibit high school coaches from working with the students in the off-season. Certainly, there are teams that form on their own to stay in shape and get ready for the upcoming seasons, but they're certainly not required. Students, it has no impact on their trial process if a student participated in a summer soccer league or summer volleyball league. But the students want to do it. I get a lot of families that are interested in doing more of that, which is great. But it's certainly not required by myself or the coaches. Same with fundraising. I'm not involved in fundraising. The coaches are not involved in fundraising. Most of the teams have some type of booster group that they do their own fundraising, mainly to go towards the end of season banquets, maybe spirit wear that the students use. But it's certainly not required. If a family chooses not to participate in the fundraising that the booster group does, they're not gonna not get invited to the banquet or get a gift that every other team does. So it really keeps it equitable for every student to participate. Final column was costs required. We don't have any user fees except for the new co-op swim team with North Reading. Our students pay $400 and North Reading pays for everything on that. So that was some of the fall. And then spring. And I should say that the coaches do a great job of, actually contributing to their own teams, which is amazing. If there's a student that needs a little help with equipment, no one's going to get rejected due to cost. So we'll find a way to get that student, if they're interested in a certain sport and they can't have the means, we'll find the equipment for them. And the coaches are wonderful, and they certainly don't do it for the money, but a lot of them spend a lot of their own money to better their own programs, which is amazing. So, any questions at all?
Mrs. Burns?
Surprise, surprise. I first would like to thank you very much for being
Sure.
here and for putting this together, because I found it to be very helpful. And I think you've touched upon, I think my biggest priority with ensuring that athletics is accessible to all students and any students, and it shouldn't be a deterrent to not participate. So I really am grateful to you and the coaches for ensuring that. I did have a couple of questions. But with some of these, I can understand sneakers would be an individual purchase, but are there any, does the athletic department and/or the coaches themselves, do they buy in bulk? Like, I remember when I used to, in the last century, I used to run track, we would buy our spikes, for track together, which was a huge cost savings. We'd still pay for them, but it was a great cost savings because we're buying in bulk. I didn't know if that's something that athletics does, or are just parents referred to certain vendors?
No, they're on their own for, whatever brand of shoe they want to wear or skate. It's kind of hard to, everyone has their own preferences. Everyone, some fit better than most, so it's kind of hard to get a whole program together and say, hey, everyone, let's go buy Nike cleats and, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Is that something that was ever been pursued, perhaps? I mean, I understand in like hockey where you've got pads that need to be fitted appropriately and, helmets for safety. I just didn't know if there was any interest or any, just
yeah, no, certainly it's a great suggestion. I think just given the individual student athlete and what fits them best, I think it's hard to kind of have everyone go with a certain vendor,
Right.
that type of thing, so.
Okay. Actually, the other questions I have, I think, if you don't mind, it's a more budgetary,
Yeah.
and it was a last-minute thought, and if you don't mind, if I can,
Sure.
I'll send him to Dr. Brandon.
Okay, sure, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much, I
My pleasure.
appreciate that.
Mr. Fennelly?
Could you just explain the swim team fee for me? Is that for, like, pool rental time, or I was just confused by that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how it started was there was interest to form a team here in Wilmington. You know, there's not a pool in town. You know, even nearby, pool times are hard to come by. So while we were, you know, fielding that request, North Reading High School, their numbers had dipped a little bit, so they invited us to be part of their team. North Reading charges a $400 user fee for their student athletes. So that was also part of the deal for us. So our families pay North Reading the $400 user fee. In turn, North Reading pays the coach's stipend, the pool rental, which is, you know, close to $20,000, different buses, you know, trainer costs, official costs. So, you know, certainly it's, swimming is one of the more expensive sports to add. So, you know, we certainly just pay what all the North Reading students are paying too, so.
That makes sense, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Ragsdale?
So I noticed looking in for cheering, that at least in the fall sports, that seems to be the only sport there where the uniforms are not provided by the school. And I don't know if that's because of just the nature of the uniform, but I was wondering if you could comment on.
Yeah, no, good question. Our uniform cycle rotation, the Sons of Italy, has been extremely generous with supporting our teams. On usually about every 6 or 7 years, we can rotate. Cheerleading is a little different. The uniform presentation is part of their score, so it's in their team's best interest to have uniforms that are more current with the latest style for cheerleading. So, you know, having uniforms that were 7 years old would negatively impact the team. So that's why cheerleading on its own, you know, is not paid for by the school. But they do a great job of getting one uniform, so it should be one purchase for 4 years that the families have to make, that they get their money's worth out of it.
Okay, all right, so that's just a sort of the one-time cost, not a recurring annual
Right.
cost.
Yeah.
Hope it doesn't go out of date in 4 years at least.
I hope not, yeah.
I also just wanted to ask about some of the contrast between, obviously, some of the equipment-heavy sports. Like, it's not necessarily a surprise that hockey, where you have, skates and pads and helmet and on guards and so forth, that can get expensive. But I was curious, because football is also an equipment-heavy sport, again, with helmets and pads and so forth. I was wondering why that is not an expense the way that hockey is.
Yep, no, good question. You know, I think Wilmington operates similar to pretty much every high school, where the high school supplies the helmets, they supply the shoulder pads, mainly because the students growing up, when they're Pop Warner programs, the organizations give them the equipment. So no one has, coming into 9th grade, nobody has their own shoulder pads and helmets for the most part. So it's just kind of how the sport operates from the 1st grade up through high school, is the organization supplies it. Also keeps us, from a safety standpoint, we send the helmets back for reconditioning. Anything that doesn't come back safe, we reject and we don't use. If students were using their own helmets, it could be a serious liability for the district if someone got injured and they were using a helmet that was rejected, that wasn't monitored by the district, so.
Now, is the hockey policy different because there's just not quite the same risk of head injury in hockey despite the other general risks?
Exactly, yes, yeah. So hockey, every school district, probably in Massachusetts, the students buy them on their own, where football, pretty much every public school town pays for football helmets and shoulder pads, so.
Mrs. Byrne?
Just to kind of piggyback on Mr. Axdale's question, granted, I know that football's a, contact sport, but watching hockey, granted, it still has, they wear helmets for a reason. Gone are the days of Jerry Cheever, you know what I mean? But my question is that who monitors the safety of the hockey helmets? How is that gear, how is that monitored?
Yep, so on the helmets, they'll have stickers that say how long the helmets are for, so
Okay.
the coaches will monitor that.
Okay,
There's no type of reconditioning of a hockey helmet, so even if we did supply them, we couldn't gather them back and send them out to get reconditioned.
okay,
Hockey helmets aren't reconditioned, so.
okay. I just didn't know the safety issue too.
Exactly,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
I think that's it.
Could you just go to the next, the last slide, if you would? Just one more, I mentioned that, while this is predominantly around athletics, this slide here just provides the data that was turned into my office to the request earlier this year to teachers around what other, if any, fees, if you will, or costs are requested from students. And so there's no specific orientation to this by department or grade level per se, although most of the data that came back, you can see here, is very centric around the high school. You can see the notation down the bottom. There's no way that I can tell you that this is exhaustive in terms of all the fees out there. That would be simply not the case. But it was a first pass, I suppose, if anything, to provide some insight in terms of the actual reality that we are reaching out to families from time to time for different things, for monetary resources. So this just provides, again, a broad overview of this. The purpose, again, for tonight is really just informational, and to the degree that at some point in the future, you as a committee want to continue this conversation or expand this conversation or seek additional information, certainly it's an important area. It connects deeply to our activities, to the budget, and to what it is that we're requesting from families. I just go back, if I could, to the athletic conversation. I remember well back to that earlier presentation earlier in the year around swimming. And the question was raised as it related to, ultimately we ended with swimming because we didn't have the funding incorporated into our budget around that. And what ensued in that discussion was certainly, I think, a suggestion, recommendation that sooner than later, we would work together, the athletic director, Tim, and myself, and the central office team, to maybe think more holistically around how are we actively reviewing the sports that we're offering? What does the usership or the participation or the interest look like? And if it's waning, then at what point do we consider phasing out a sport and introducing a new sport, like swimming or some other one that I'm not thinking of right now that might be out there. Wiffle ball? Paddle ball? No. What's it called? Pickleball. Sorry, I do know where I am. As a crazy example it might be, but I don't know. But I do think that that's a relevant, an important aspect to consider just as it relates to athletics in the larger sphere. Assuming that we continue as a district to operate without user fees. That can become a different discussion if it's a different direction. But so I'm mindful of that, not for anything further necessarily tonight, but again, happy to take suggestions this evening or in the future around where we go with all of this. And with that, I'll leave it.
Question? I just have one comment about we had an excellent band concert last night. I didn't see instruments on that list for strings or for band. I'm sure there are other things as well, but
Yeah.
okay. Just thought I'd add that.
No, I again, to dig really deep and to be able to be in a position to say we've covered all the gamut. I definitely went through this. Will require a lot more hand-holding to make sure we get all of the information.
Mrs. Banks?
I would just like to say, I think this is, this continues to be a healthy discussion that I think we should talk about periodically, at least once a year. Again, not to beat the dead horse, but I will. It's just ensuring that our students, that all students have the same availability to these programs. And again, not to be a deterrent, because as everything changes, inflation occurs. And I think I just want to be mindful that the district can support those who may require the financial assistance to be able to participate. And I think that's where I would, I guess, have the conversation to ensure that we have that balance that we can support those kids, and so I think it is healthy to, have a recurring discussion.
If I may, I completely agree. To peel it back, this is about activities that students have a chance to be involved in. It certainly is a very huge aspect related to one of your primary responsibilities, and that's to approve a budget. And, you roll together all of the respective financial resources that are entailed in, I'm specifically talking about athletics here, and it is an awful lot of the district's budget. That's a very important piece of the discussion that you as a committee rightly can and should have. So.
Mr.
And just
Ratzlaff.
quickly, just one more comment, which is that this is also analogous to the one-to-one Chromebook program, which is another thing that
Yes.
we don't support in the district budget, except by providing some, financial aid for families that need it. But that goes to the heart of the educational
Yes,
program
of course.
in all regards, not just extracurricular and athletics.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. You can go back.
All right, so moving back to item 8B, as titled in the memo, thank you, Tim, sorry, the vaping committee presentation. In your packet, there's an extensive memo, and I'll invite the folks that are here. We have a number of folks here this evening who are going to present to you this. And I'll just quickly turn it over to them in a moment, but just to give the background context. So, one of the annual activities, as you know, of the committee is to approve the student handbook. Specifically, Massachusetts general law requires school committees in the Commonwealth to approve the high school handbook. You, as a committee, as I've come to learn, have in the past had both the middle school and high school handbooks come before you. But, if there's one issue that I think it's very fair to say is garnering lots of attention throughout I would suggest North America, it's vaping. And it became clear to, I think, many that this is on the minds of students, it's on the minds of staff, it's on the minds of families, parents and guardians, as it rightly should be. And so work started to unfold around, the need emerging to take a closer look at our respective policies that might be embedded in a handbook. And as this started to unfold, it seemed that it would be somewhat off base to just present the handbook to you as a committee and just sort of gloss over this, because this is a very prominent area, almost daily in discussions in and outside of education. And so one of the, I'll just say this, one of the very moving conversations that I had earlier this year was with a group of high school students down the hallway, where there was such grave concern that they raised with me as one of the areas of greatest concern and hopeful change for the better in the school around vaping. And that really dovetailed with the growing concern that administration had and, again, teachers had. So the time seemed perfect and ripe to circle back to where we were as a district and take a closer look at what we have in place and where there could be areas for growth and improvement. We're so fortunate to have Ms. Murray here, as I've come to learn, is one of the great leaders in the district to help oversee and support a lot of aspects related to social and emotional well-being. And I reached out to her and I gave her an assignment, and she took it and ran. And with that, here we go.
Well, we'll start here, and actually, the first point, as Dr. Brand said, was the student voice. So we have Jocelyn and Patrick here, who are going to begin with how it all started.
Thank you. I'm Jocelyn White, and I'm a junior here at the high school. And so one of the reasons that I got involved was because I feel like the risks of vaping are somewhat unknown, and I want to help others learn about it. And back when cigarettes were a thing, people didn't know it would lead to cancer, and I feel like that's sort of what vaping, down the road we'll find out what the effects are. And another reason why I wanted to be a part of this is because in the bathrooms here at school, if I walk into the girls' bathroom, there'll be a bunch of girls in there vaping, and the stalls are occupied because they're in there trying to hide it, and the bathroom just smells. And I just want to go in there to use the bathroom, not to have to deal with all that. And I know Patrick will talk about that in the boys' bathroom as well. And then I got involved in this because I was part of the wellness committee, and Mrs. Crow recommended me to Mr. Phillips to help voice our opinions.
So, my name's Patrick O'Mahony. I got into this as a sophomore, and one of my biggest concerns was the fact that our school bathrooms, both on the second and third floor, were closed. And the main reason was so we can narrow down the amount of people we could catch vaping. So we originally had 4 open, that turned to 2, and that kind of caused me to draw some concern about it. So I reached out to Mr. Phillips, and he said how one of the biggest problems that we could work towards was vaping and how to kind of stop it. So I joined the vaping committee, and ever since then, we've been working towards developing a policy that we would see fit.
And became the staff voice. So again, Dr. Brand reached out to us. How can we help in this situation? And I'll turn it down to the administrators who are seeing this firsthand.
The last couple of years, we've seen an uptick in this sort of behavior. I know at the middle school and at the high school. It's become difficult at times to detect with the changing of the different devices. In fact, that there's even clothing that sweatshirts that are actually a vape device. So it's become difficult for that and detecting it in the bathrooms and things like that.
And certainly what we see is not just, it started out as these big giant vapes that that had nicotine oil in them. Now it's tiny little jewels that have marijuana, THC in them. And it's impossible for us to tell the difference unless something's actually written on the device. So we have students who are using drugs in school, and we can't always tell that that's happening. So speaking to Patrick and Jocelyn, the poor kids got roped into this without really knowing what was going on when I talked to them. But Patrick came to me about the bathrooms, and we said the reason we are closing bathrooms is because we can monitor 2 bathrooms. It's very difficult for us to monitor 4. And what we also see is that on more than one occasion, we've had to call paramedics and EMTs because students have whether it's been they're not used to it or too much of whatever THC oil they're ingesting has caused them to have medical concerns. So we've had to call ambulances to have them transported to hospitals because they're not, they don't handle it as well as some others may, which is good and bad, I guess. So this is the kind of stuff we see, and this is part of the reason why we're so heavily involved in this and trying to help put an end to this. And Patrick came to me and said, we want to get these bathrooms open, how do we do it? And my response was, well, we need to stop kids from vaping. That's really all there is to it. That's the bigger issue here. And so seeing it and seeing what we've seen, in terms of these medical issues, in terms of this use is really been a major problem for us, and that's why we've worked so hard to try to help in a number of different ways, punitively, but we want to be positive about it, and we want to find positive ways to support students and parents to make good choices, to make positive choices when they're engaged, to avoid engaging in these activities.
Having parents reach out to me as well, saying that we're noticing this at home, my student is vaping more, and just the overall health concerns got me into bringing in the community. We do work closely with Samantha from the police department, who does do some home visits, and I'll let her speak a little bit about the community voice piece.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I'm the health and recovery coordinator, so I'm based out of the police department here in Wilmington, working on kind of a community level with first responders, and so kind of got pulled into this due to, kids are only in school so many hours a day, so many months a year, and so kind of looking at, what are the calls for service outside of those hours, and how are we able to kind of collaborate with the schools to really kind of wrap around these kids and support them in all of their environments throughout the town. So they're not just getting it at school, but they're also kind of getting positive reinforcement with whatever's going on at home or wherever they might hang out or be in the community. So looking at this in a bigger picture, and kind of have done some steps, such as, changing nicotine sales. The Board of Health was kind of spearheaded that and changed that so flavored tobacco and nicotine can only be sold at specialty stores, and other types of changes on a community level to help to kind of implement and support this work that this committee has been working on over the last 6 months.
So student, staff, community equals committee, and that's where we are. In January, we established this committee to really, each week, we met once a week for 30 minutes, and we would talk about the trends of student vaping, what are we seeing in the school, what are we seeing in the middle school, reviewing district handbook policy, what can we look at to change and foster here to explore a diversionary program and offer education to students that instead of putting this infraction on them, how else can we help educate them about the seriousness of vaping? Again, the members are Doreen Crow, who is just back with us here, Director of Nursing, myself, the Coordinator of Behavioral Health, Christine Murray, Christopher Phillips from the high school, Assistant Principal, Jeanette Quirk, Middle School, Samantha Reef, Health and Recovery, and we have student reps, Patrick O'Mahony and Jocelyn White here with us tonight. We did have a senior who was with us, Emma Rind, and also Colton Sullivan. So a good representative of staff and students. Community. So we're gonna have the students talk a little bit about what vaping is and how it impacts students.
So, as the PowerPoint says, vaping is the act of inhaling and exhaling the aerosol produced by an e-cigarette or similar battery-powered device. And these could be e-cigarettes, vapes, tanks, mods, and some brands that are pretty popular are such as Juul, Blue, Bow, Breeze, many others. And really what the e-liquids that are used in the devices are meant for is they have specific flavors that have been seen to be, while healthy in foods to consume, not so healthy to inhale and exhale. So a big thing that we kind of saw is also that there's different other really bad chemicals in there that were cancer causing as well, so.
And there's no nicotine and other harmful chemicals in vaping products, and nicotine's addictive, and it's associated with mood disorders, lower impulse control, and challenges with school and learning.
If I may, I brought some visual aids, if you care. I'll pass them around so everyone can see this. Some I wouldn't recommend, if you do want to take a look at these, taking them out of the bags, otherwise your hands will smell like lemon curd all night. So if you want to take a look for a second, you can see some of the devices that we have confiscated, and this is a very small cross-section of some of the devices that we have confiscated. That bag over there, it was just from one person. So you can see sort of, some of this contains nicotine, some of it does contain THC. So this is all stuff we've collected, and you can see the size and the shapes and how easily they're hidden, for example, or they're kept from us, and they do a very good job of that.
So during our meeting, some of the things we did was we would review the Wilmington Public Schools handbook, and we would look into other district policies and procedures around discipline and vaping.
And we also discussed best practices for substance use diversionary programs. And through research, we looked at other districts' way of dealing with consequences and education for students. And then we also planned for early education. We planned to go down to the West Intermediate and North Intermediate and show a PowerPoint to the kids to try to get them learning about vapes now, because if you're going to talk to them at a younger age, they'll be more apt to listen and not vape.
So we figured out through this research that we're not alone. If we look at this, the category on the left is really how in handbooks, vapes and e-cigarettes are qualified, if you will. And on the number of schools using this category in the handbook, the grade levels that were looked at, and the consequences that were given. This is through all the principals that gathered this information through Massachusetts MSAA. So a majority of the schools have it listed vaping as just tobacco and nicotine, where we're seeing a growing trend of people moving towards listing it under drug paraphernalia. So we figured that was hopeful in some of the changes that we were going to present for our handbook.
So, the current policies around vaping are actually part of our tobacco policy at this point. And that was a couple years ago, only a couple of years ago, probably, that e-cigarettes and vapes were added as part of our nicotine policy. And so any student at the high school, for example, who's found in possession of or using a tobacco product that includes a vape, would receive a Board of Health fine of $50, which we send to Shelley Newhouse, and she deals, we send a name to her and she deals with it from there, and 1 day of in-school suspension, which is certainly more than sufficient in terms of dealing with someone who is smoking a cigarette, but someone who is potentially smoking marijuana in school needs to have some sort of, not necessarily a punitive consequence, but some way of recognizing how to stop that and how to prevent it from continuing. I don't know, what is the middle school, the current policy? I didn't.
We're the same.
Okay, oh, good, I didn't realize that. All right, so the idea would be then, in creating this new policy, would be to sort of stiffen the factors related to using a vape in school, and therefore, we'd be separating vapes from the other tobacco policy in the handbook. And so, how that reads is that, where's the vaping? Vaping? Is this the new one? Oh, okay. Oh, right here. So that as the new vaping policy would read, a student who is found for the first time in violation of the vape policy, which would be possession or use of a vape, would be subject to 5 days of out-of-school suspension or participation in a 1-day diversionary program, online diversionary program, which we'll talk about briefly in just a few minutes, and be in in-school suspension for that 1 day while they complete that program. Okay. The second offense would require, again, a 5-day out-of-school suspension or 5-week diversionary program, wherein they would, again, we'll talk some more about that later, but it would be obviously a bigger process. And then a third violation would require 7 days of out-of-school suspension. And part of the reason that we are looking at it in those terms is we're realizing that we obviously can't tell the difference between what is THC and what is nicotine. So our goal then is to default to the assumption that it's some sort of drug paraphernalia, that drugs are contained within a vape and that we are treating them as such. If we have proof or evidence that they are drugs, that there is a drug in it, if we can tell the difference, for example, we have seen them where they have THC written, 80% THC written on the side of the vial, then we might take steps to further steps that would require a violation of the drug policy, and that's a different policy.
The other aspect of the different days with suspension is that ultimately, I know I don't like students being suspended, but hopefully the choice of the diversionary programs would be more of a carrot and seem more appealing to them as well. I've seen presentations on the diversionary programs at different districts and how successful they've been, not only being an alternative to the out-of-school suspension or any suspension, but also for students not repeating the offense.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the thought behind that as well.
And then you'll notice also there are some new and edited policies related to drug paraphernalia, suspicion of vape use, and the diversion program. The drug paraphernalia policy was edited really with the focus on, again, separating vapes out from the drug paraphernalia policy. So students who are found in possession of drug paraphernalia, and you see some examples there, rolling papers, roach clips, things like that, pipes, would be subject to the suspensions that are comparable to what is in the handbook currently. But again, vapes are not mentioned, vapes are not related to that, and the whole point of doing that was to separate out the vape from the drug paraphernalia policy. We've also added a suspicion of vape use policy. The reason behind that would be, you walk into the bathroom, there's 10 kids standing there, nobody has a vape in there that's visible because they're smaller than a hand and they can be easily spirited away, if you will. So the idea would be you'd be in violation of this policy if you were in that bathroom. We'd take down your name, we'd go back to the office and call your parents and let them know that we saw you and that you were probably vaping or with a group of people who were vaping. And then if that becomes a recurring incident, we might take further steps, which would include a search of either property or person to determine if you're in possession, or to take additional steps to say, you're in an unauthorized area, we can obviously take disciplinary action against that as well. And then the diversion program, I think there's going to be more about that later, so I won't get into that right now, but our diversionary program was designed to sort of help avoid students using vapes and to make them realize the dangers of it, and I think that's something that's going to help. So those are a couple policy changes, and Christine, I think, was going to take the diversion.
So, exciting opportunity to have a diversion program for our students to be educated in, again, the harmful effects, and the first step would be a one-day diversion that we would offer to be completed in an in-school suspension. And we did purchase a license of Vape Educate, which had multiple chapters. We had the students look at it. I don't know if you want to tell them a little bit more about what you observed or how it felt to take it, but it's an online course that would be offered.
So Patrick and I, at one of the meetings, did a chapter of the Vape Educate, and basically it's videos and readings, and after a certain amount of time, it asks you questions, and in order to move on, you have to complete the questions. And then at the end of the chapter, there's like a test. There's a test for it, and it's about 30 minutes or so. So I don't know if you have anything else to add.
It really makes, like, this program is really efficient in making sure that the student does retain and really take in all the information with its timed ability to, it has a little timer in the corner which allows, after that timer's done, for you to move on instead of you just clicking skip and skip, and it gives you a score that you must hit in order to continue moving on to the next unit. So it's a really efficient and good way that the students will be able to get better.
Thank you. Dr. Clark had an opportunity to visit and hear about some more diversion programs at more of a length, a more detailed program for 5 weeks, where it would involve interactions and building rapport with staff. So I'll let her speak a little bit about the diversion program for 5 weeks.
Sure. So this program, like Ms. Murray said, is 5 weeks long. Each week would center on a different topic for the students, much like Vape Educate with the 5 different chapters, but it would expand upon it. It would also attach a staff member potentially to each week, where the students would go through, need to complete a variety of things, such as watch a video, reflect on it, read some articles, but then those articles would be centered perhaps around the dangers of vaping, and then they would meet with the school nurse or a health teacher and have that reflection as well, and build that rapport with an adult in their lives. It would also be touched at the end of the week with an administrator, either an assistant principal or the principal. Other weeks would center, perhaps the person might be the SRO to talk about the laws that are involved here. I've seen where the health teacher, the nurse, a counselor as well, have all been adults that have been used. And it's been successful, from what I understand, with that, building that rapport, that those are now 5 adults that those students have relationships with, that if they have further questions or need anything, they have those people that they can touch upon again.
So this is where we bring in Samantha from the police department. We work collaboratively to apply for the Chana 15 collaborative grant. I'll let her describe that a little bit more.
Yeah, so as a team, we kind of were partnering this grant proposal with kind of this proposed handbook change. And we kind of looked at 3 key ideas and goals within this grant. The first one, and they kind of all align with kind of what everyone's already talked about as far as the goals and the missions of the handbook changes. So the first one is to increase vaping awareness. So, additional education opportunities, whether that's, maybe new signage to include a logo of a vape rather than just a cigarette, continuing to make sure that health information is up to date, The second goal is to further investigate and develop diversionary programming and resources. So this was very, kind of aligned with what we talked about in the last slide around whether it's staffing or the curriculum, but really to kind of coincide with the diversion plan and kind of that disciplinary track that we were talking about, while also really focusing on further data collection, continuing to look into research that's already available, what other schools are doing. This is still a relatively new, over the last few years, kind of trend that we're seeing, so a lot of data is still being collected, so acknowledging that and wanting to be able to kind of have a platform to obtain some of that and to apply it to what Wilmington specifically needs. And the third goal would be, a larger financial component of the grant would be alternative ways of detection. So whether that's detectors in the bathroom that are similar to like a smoke detector, but they detect vaporized from the products that kids are using, or test strips to really be able to, it's kind of like a Q-tip and you run it along a thin piece of paper that has a chemical reaction, whether there's THC in that liquid or oil. So these are just, some examples of things that we proposed within this grant. We are still waiting to hear back from it, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to kind of supplement these, this diversion plan and the other proposed objectives we have with this grant. And so it's just another way that we're kind of able to collaborate with the schools and on a community level to really, again, just make sure everyone's on the same page and getting wrapped around supports.
So we're dedicated to continue work as a group, and we're gonna do the presentation to educate the students at the younger level, and we plan to update the handbook for the substance use policy and make the diversionary program available. And then, so we're hopeful that these steps will help and look forward to continuing this work. And yeah, so.
And I think regardless of the grant, we're going to continue this work and work together as a group. So we thank you for your opportunity to listen to some of the changes we're proposing. We're really open to working together. I know May 22nd really is the handbook policy night. We just want to give you a little taste of what the committee's been doing and where we're headed. So we appreciate you having the opportunity to have us here. Any questions?
I'm sure there are questions.
I don't mind going last, because I got a ton.
Does someone want to take her,
Hello.
Mr. Buer? Jumped right in.
Just don't forget about me.
I won't, we'll come back.
I would just say, number one, thank you for being leaders in the community and for taking this action. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And as far as the committee as a whole, I certainly appreciate all the work you're doing. This is such a huge concern. And I know you have your work cut out for you, because as important as education is, when I was growing up, there was no shortage of information about the dangers of cigarettes, and yet it was still prevalent in my high school. So I know how the hurdles and the obstacles that you guys are going to face, so I appreciate all the work you guys are doing on this.
I'm just looking. Mr. Smaha.
I'll just add, I just thank you for doing this work. I think it's really, really important. I really like the ideas around the alternative to discipline stuff. I think that's really important, the diversion stuff. I'm really going to be interested to hear more about that as you sort of look, especially the 5-week one. I think that's really where you're going to make the most difference. You know what I mean? I think with kids, if kids are, just getting, you did it, suspended for 5 days without any other sort of alternatives, I think this makes much more sense. It's much more proactive, I think, approach to it. I guess one of my questions about the diversion program, like when would a kid be doing it? Like when would they, like the one-day diversion program, would they be spending after school time? Would it be during the day? Like when would they?
The thought, if I may, the thought was that they would be completing it during that one-day in-school suspension.
Okay.
It's a 5-chapter assignment that, as we had the students do it, it's about 45 minutes a chapter. The administrator is given access to where we get the results when they pass each chapter. I mean, we didn't further discuss if it takes a student longer than a day, but the thought is that they would do it during that school day.
And the 5-week one will take a little bit more logistics.
Mhm.
So, okay, so they would have in-school suspension, and most of the in-school suspension they'd be spent doing the diversion thing.
Sure.
That makes
yes.
sense.
Mhm. The 5-week one would be a combination of some things where the assignments would be done perhaps outside of the school day. The meetings might be done inside the school day. That part hasn't really been ironed out. I've seen it in different ways. You know, and then if the suspension piece could be up to the administrator piece if they like defaulted on the 5 weeks, that could be something as the carrot, like you don't have to be suspended. And if they did 3 out of the 5, what would we do? So, but that would be a combination from what I've seen in other school districts. If that helps.
Thank you. Again, I think you've started very strongly, and I very much thank you and kind of concur with my colleagues. I do have some concerns that we can address, but I think I have a better way of, I really do think that the district's policy committee, the school committee's policy committee, should look at this, because I think our district policy should mirror whatever's in the handbooks, especially with the detail and the work that you've invested. Primarily, one concern is the violations, and I totally get my sister actually is a phys ed instructor at Newburyport High, and she's the designated person to do the diversion program. And when I first learned about it through her, I was like, why aren't we doing it here? And it was more not centered around vaping per se, but although this has really been, as you said, it's been a primary focus in many, many high schools. But the aspect is in looking at the violations, especially with the out-of-school suspension, it concerns me in twofold. I love the idea of the in-school suspension in doing an all-day focus or, making a big part. I think that's great because I don't want to lose students to free time outside of school. I think they need that direction and structure to learn and benefit from the educational resources this could provide. My other concern with the violations is that if you get to the 3rd violation, that is 18 days, which means that the district has to require a tutor on that 10th day. So that student decides to take the suspension, then the district will need to supply a tutor because it's 10 days after, within a school year. So that's something to consider. But I think this is great. I think I think it can be refined, because I really can't wrap my head around the paraphernalia aspects with regards to, I understand how you were separating the paraphernalia from the other equipment, but I think it's one and the same. It's equipment, whether it be rolling papers, whether it be a mechanical vaping aspect. But I would like to recommend that if the committee would sit with the school committee's policy committee to really hone the great work that you guys have started and have put together, because I think I have some also legal concerns regarding bathrooms, because we know that vaping doesn't, although that's the primary site, sitting on the wellness committee as well. I know that these vaping issues do arise in the classroom and on the athletic fields, which is, and also another concern. And just wondering, I think it would be great if we could team together to create the district policy and then see how that may play into the handbooks for each individual school. It's just a suggestion that I offer, because I think this would be a wonderful collaborative approach to really targeting the concerns and issues around vaping and other drug use.
If I may, just a couple of things, and thank you for the points. So first off, I do want the committee to know that I think we work with 2 attorneys, one more predominantly for student affairs and student issues, and the other representing the school committee administration. The respective work that you have before you has been run by the attorney who works closely with us for student affairs. So in terms of it being passing that sort of that review, you should know that it's in good stead as it relates to that. The second piece, and I do respect the point around alignment of policy, that's obviously, that's an important piece as it relates to any relevant school committee policies. Again, just to reiterate, the presence of this tonight here is for your review, is for your consideration, is for your comments. Ultimately, the hope here, from an alignment standpoint and timing, is that the work that's embodied in this proposal can appropriately be included in the handbook. And that handbook is something that you have to approve as a school committee. And so the timing seemed right to align with that trajectory, and I would suggest that certainly the committee can discuss in terms of if that's a course of action that you're comfortable with, possibly with tweaks or revisions or adjustments herein, that the work can certainly ensue after the handbook is approved to align the relevant school committee policies. So it sort of becomes a timing issue here in terms of ultimate approval. We have 2 meetings left currently for the school year. The intention is to have the handbooks respectively presented to you for your first read at the May 22nd school committee meeting, followed by a vote of approval at, I think it's June, whatever the June meeting, June 12th. So I just wanted to make those points in terms of response.
Mr. Ragsdale.
I'd like to first echo the appreciation of other committee members for the work you've done so far. This is a tough nut to crack, and thank you for all this good work. I have some specific questions about the edited policies, in particular, the new policies. One is that there seems to be some similar language about paraphernalia in the current tobacco policy, which I understand is not supposed to be changing, and the drug and paraphernalia policy, the new edited policy that, for example, in the tobacco policy, smoking-related paraphernalia is listed: cigarette lighters, pipes, cigarette papers. Those are also mentioned in the same as far as the drug paraphernalia policy, like cigarette lighters, pipes, and rolling papers and so forth. But the violations are different, and they're obviously different categories. So is there a way to distinguish how those are being treated?
I think in general, it's a good point. I think in general, it would be contextual. It's not necessarily, there's no inherent way to distinguish the two. That is very much true, and obviously if we can't, we would certainly default to the less severe, if you will. What we do see is that there's typically context when you talk about a pipe. I think the pipe in the tobacco would be like your grandpa's pipe. That's what I think. That's what is intended in that kind of pipe, as opposed to a marijuana pipe, which is pretty clearly a marijuana pipe in most cases because it smells like marijuana. It looked, so we generally have a pretty good understanding based on our expertise and our experience, sort of what we're looking for. But yeah, there's not always an inherent way to distinguish the difference. I'll certainly cop to that for sure.
Okay. Another question, when you were talking about the suspicion of vape use policy, because that seems to be kind of the biggest new thing in as far, I mean, other than the diversionary programs are new and important, and those are excellent. But as far as the suspicion policy, so what you described, I think made a lot of sense in your presentation, that you walk into a bathroom and there are just like 10 people congregated in the bathroom. It's like, sure, what are you doing out? Having your secret clubhouse meeting? Right. No, probably not. But the policy here says any student found in a gathering of 2 or more students in the bathroom will be subject to a warning for suspicion. So, I mean, as I read that, is that not just a 1 student per bathroom policy? I mean, is it, or how are we interpreting a gathering? I assume it doesn't just mean that you can't have 2 students in the bathroom, but we're talking about some kind of collective. I know a lot of this is kind of like I'll know it when I see it, that there's like suspicious lurking in the bathroom versus people who are actually using it for its proper purpose.
I think, we walk into the bathroom and see 2 boys at a urinal. That's not a gathering. We walk in and we see 2 boys standing, talking to each other, one of them leaning against the sink. That might be a little different. Again, it's ultimately, I think, going to be our responsibility to make a determination about what we think is a violation of the policy and what isn't, and what is a, hey guys, get out of here, and what is, all right, what's your name? I'm going to call your mom. And technically a gathering is 2 or more, and I think that was actually the attorney that might have made note of that in terms of what putting the number on what a gathering was. I don't think we actually did that, but What I do think is, yeah, it's ultimately gonna be I know it when I see it. Yeah, I can't really be any clearer than that. You know, it's one of those where it's rare that we actually just see 2. If we usually see 12 or 15, so it's usually not an issue for 2, but it's certainly something we'll keep in mind. Yeah, it doesn't, I don't think we're gonna default to, this is a one student bathroom. I don't think that's the default assumption.
And one last thing that I want to clarify about, so it says repeated violation of this policy can lead to disciplinary consequences, and then the school administrators can also use their discretion in searching a student. And in particular, and this is probably a broader question, but I think particularly when it involves potentially searching a student, I would love to see some clarification of the role of our school SROs in this policy. Because
They do
this
have
kind
a
of,
different, it's a good question, because they do have a different role when it comes to searching.
and this kind of, I know that we just recently approved the new memorandum of understanding, which is supposed to, clarify the specific roles that SROs play, that they're not, they don't take the place of school discipline and school policy.
So when they do search, it does have that element of a legal aspect to it. So typically, if I search a student, a female student, I'll have another female person in the room with me, and we would search. Having the SRO there definitely adds a different element to it with the legal aspect.
There are sort of there's sort of a minimum standard for searches for police, that probable cause. We don't have the burden of probable cause as administrators in a school. So we have a little more leeway in terms of how frequently and how often we can search.
So just to clarify, you can search a student without a parent present, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I think there's a reasonable suspicion standard.
That
of
is
course,
correct,
yes,
yeah, I wasn't
yeah,
gonna get into,
But
yes,
forgive me.
we have a
Thank
reasonable
you.
suspicion
Good to clarify that
standard,
piece.
yes, that we have to meet before we can search a student.
But please know
And-
that they're informed. It's,
No,
Yeah.
no, not to, I just wanted, for my own clarification, but thank you.
Can I go? All right, thank you so much for being here and for your leadership. I think my favorite part is that you're going to go to the west and the north. Are the students going, or are the high school students doing those presentations? So I think that will be really powerful for those 4th and 5th graders to hear from you and to talk to them really just honestly about what to expect, because I do think it's such a shift when they leave the north and the west and they go to the middle school and they start hearing some of those words, and they're really unprepared for that. So I think it's going to be really helpful to hear from you. So thank you for thinking of that and doing that for our children. I just have a quick question about student athletes. Are there coaches, are there different consequences if they're a student athlete?
Any student who's engaged in extracurricular activities is subject to the chemical health policy, which would be in addition to any of these consequences.
Okay. So that doesn't need to be a part of this, it's a separate?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah, MIAA rules would govern that.
And
Yeah,
then-
you all have approved a chemical health policy, and it's
Yep.
it's included in that.
And then the suspicion of vape use, are there still only 2 bathrooms open at the high school? That's
Good
my only
question.
worry, I'm sort of envisioning someone.
Right, yeah.
Patrick,
There
like,
could
I'm
be
like-
15 people in that
Right?
bathroom, for sure.
Someone's going in there to really just, and there's only 2, and there's a large group, I mean, how do you navigate
There are
that?
at least 3 boys' bathrooms open at any given time, and there are 5 girls' bathrooms, I believe, open at any given time. So if there's not just 1 or 2 bathrooms, there's plenty of chances for guys to go, so to speak.
Well, I just mean if they know there's a congregate, but then how do you decide, well, if I go in and then I'm
Right.
accused of, I don't know, it just
Yeah,
seems
yeah, and
messy.
that's certainly possible, and our goal there would be to just inform parents, and it's as much about getting the parents to have that conversation with their kids as it is anything else.
Of course. I did attend the vaping presentation that you put on just a few months ago, or a month ago. And it was, I was incredibly just shocked, and I didn't even know how to spell some of those words. I'm writing Jewel like Jewel, and I'm just like, and then I see it come up, and I'm like, oh, geez. I mean, there's so much that parents are really just unaware of, and so I think the more we can do to get this out in the open and have parents talking to their children about it, especially starting at the 4th and 5th grade levels, I think will be really helpful as they move forward.
Did that presentation really helped provide materials for our students to go
Excellent,
down
yeah.
to the west and the north, so it's concrete, evidence-based materials that they have researched. So she's been a continued support to the district, which is great.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate you being here. Oh, sorry, Mr. Rexton. Thank you.
Just trying to wrap things up.
Moving on.
This is, I think it's to everyone, it seems that since we've treated this as a, a community-wide problem, that this doesn't, and this is something that Ms. Reef said specifically about, that it doesn't end at the schoolhouse doors, that, that we have people in the community, in the world. To what extent are we trying to target community engagement, and in particular, parent engagement and education, to also try and tackle this problem?
Part of the grant was also to get potential speakers to come in that would also not only educate our students, but also educate the community as well, as part of that with the series.
Something else we're starting up right now is like a media and kind of townwide campaign using, like sticker clings in bathrooms. So I have some middle schoolers going around to different businesses, different restaurants, different agencies in town, kind of coming at it from a student perspective, saying, hey, this is something that's going on right now. Can we go into your bathrooms and stick their easy peel-offs? There's 4 different ones that kind of are just really quick and kind of straightforward messaging, so that it's not just the messaging in the schools, but it is on a community level too. So parents, whether they're running into the bathroom at Market Basket or wherever it might be in town, they're seeing kind of the same messaging that kids are seeing. And then we're also hoping to kind of take that to a social media platform also. So whether that's Facebook, Instagram,
WCTV.
Twitter, kind of local resources also. But kind of having this consistent messaging, these same logos and images, so that it's across the town, to kind of,
And we have a lot of support through the Wilmington Substance Abuse Coalition, working with the town manager, police, fire, schools, has been a great resource for this.
I was with Mrs. Bryson with regards to the Behavioral Task Force, and I was amazed, because I think the visuals speak volumes, and even the examples that you brought this evening, Mr. Phillips, they change so rapidly, the commercial and marketing of these products, in so many sizes, so many, like, looking at some of the examples that you brought in with you, no idea that, they're, vaping chemicals, you know what I mean, guava, passion guava, it's, and I think having those discussions with the visuals as to what this could potentially look like, I think may assist parents. I know I'm clueless with regards to this, the newest trend here, as to how innocent it all looks. You know what I mean? So I would really think that if we can kind of keep up to date with, here's a new product on the line, those kind of updates in the news release would be, I think, very helpful. So try to capture that too at home for parents.
Can I maybe just one final piece to respond to Mr. Ragsdale's question? Again, it sort of brings us to this close here. The idea behind this is a starting point, and hopefully the outreach can and should come from your ultimate approval. This gets incorporated into the handbook. This certainly, to me, transcends just an update to a code of conduct. This is very hard-hitting, and this has significant consequences potentially in terms of its impact on students and families. And so the committee's gotten the work to this point, which is terrific, and thank you for your supportive words. If this gets into the code of conduct, certainly we need, I think, to really be mindful of how we push that messaging out, so that families are aware of it, and it's not just getting it in September and signing off like business as usual. It's a new handbook for the 2019-20 school year. It has to go much deeper than that for their outreach piece, and hopefully the partnership, with or without the grant, is ripe for that kind of communication for our families, because students and families need to know about this matter, for sure. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The final item, just to bring to the committee's attention, 8D, I would like to pass over tonight. And so with that, moving on to number 9.
Public comment. Anybody here for public comment? There's so many people here. Nobody?
Want to say something?
Number 10, other reports. Do we have any subcommittee reports?
Do we want to talk about the strategic planning meeting? I know we already got an update earlier, so I don't know if you want to say more about the.
I'm fine, but do you want to add anything about the meeting? Was it just yesterday? Was it 2 days ago?
It was
When was
2 days ago, I think.
2 days ago.
I don't think it was yesterday.
Are you good? Okay. Correspondence.
Yes, I have one.
Okay.
This is to the school committee from me. I don't know who else to send it.
Just handed it to yourself, right hand to left hand.
That's why I didn't put a stamp on the envelope. I figured it reads, "Dear colleagues, I'd like to sincerely thank you for the lovely flower arrangement and cards of condolences on my father's death. Your kindness and thoughtfulness are greatly appreciated. Warmest regards, me." But I also wanted to extend my appreciation to Wilmington Public Schools and their staff are also thinking of me at this difficult time. It was a great source of comfort to receive your cards and reach out, and the floral arrangements were absolutely lovely, and I just want to very much thank you very much for thinking of me. It's greatly appreciated. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have another letter or invitation in our packets. We should all have one. The awards presentation ceremony on Thursday, May 16th at 7 p.m., so don't forget to put this on your refrigerator. And then I'll move on to number 12, our future school committee meeting dates, May 22nd, June 12th.
Yes.
And then upcoming district events, number 13, we have the strings concert tomorrow evening. I actually believe it's in the gym. I think that's in the gym, but that's what my ticket says. But 7 p.m. The art show is this weekend at the middle school, so that's May 10th and 11th. May 16th, we have the jazz band, Wilmington Public Library. May 16th, the underclassmen awards night. That's in the Joanne Benton Auditorium at 6:30 p.m. That's the invitation. Is it 6:30 or 7? 6:30?
You have 6:30.
Well, 6:30 is here. Okay.
7 in the invitation, yeah.
Interesting, to get some clarification on that.
Yes.
May 17th and 18th, we have the spring musical, The Drowsy Chaperone, here at the high school in the Joanne Benton Auditorium. That's May 17th and 18th. May 20th, we have the National Honor Society induction ceremony. That's in the Joanne Benton Auditorium, 7 p.m. May 21st, we have the chorus concert, also here at the high school at 7 p.m. So I think the events that we typically try to attend, or at least have a good presence, on this list would be the induction ceremony and the underclassmen awards night. So I think if we could just maybe let Tristan know who plans to be there. Sometimes there's seating set aside for us, and so just to give Tristan an idea of who's going to be there so that we can make sure, one, that we have a good representation, and also that we have spaces saved for us, and then sometimes they'll reserve some parking for us as well, which is always nice.
Indeed.
Do you have anything else to add?
I do not.
Okay.
One thing, I wonder, with the addition of 2 new members and the departure of 2, I wonder if we want to just briefly touch on the subcommittee.
Sure. Thank you. Yep. So we won't do this, we won't reassign or volunteer just now, but if we want to go, we'll go through them, and then if you have any questions and you want to ask about some of the responsibilities or time commitment, then the committee can certainly answer those for you.
If there's any committees you're interested in, we always shift around, so.
Sure, and bring that with you next time. So we will definitely work on that next time, especially the ones you see where Tom Talbot or Julie Broussard, or we will need to fill some of those spots. So we'll do some shifting, so think about what you might be interested in. We have the policy subcommittee. I'm just going to go down the line unless someone wants to jump in. The sick bank subcommittee. Superintendent evaluation subcommittee. School committee representative to the WEF Board of Directors. School committee representative to the Wellness Advisory Committee that Mrs. Burns was just referencing. School committee representative to CPAC. School committee executive session minutes. Legislative representative.
School committee executive session minutes, by the way, that'll be you.
That's
Julie's
just-
listed on that, but it's always the chair.
Okay. School committee handbook protocol. And then, Mr. Richard, will we need those?
Contract negotiations, no.
Okay. And the town master facilities plan?
There's not one, as I understand it.
No.
Not currently.
On the negotiations, when the next contract comes
Yep.
up, we'll have to throw
Okay.
that.
And then school committee, family communication relations. And that does it. Do new members have any questions for us?
If I may,
Of course.
just, if questions come up, feel free to email certainly Glenn or the chair, I would think.
All right. So that's one final motion. Does anyone want to make it?
I'd
Mrs.
like to
Burns?
make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Mrs. Newhouse? All in favor? Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.